Oh, okay. We're all set.
Yeah, well, it is about 6:30, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. Uh, but just wanted to start off this first presentation for the year. I am a new face, probably for some who may see this live or in person. My name is Kellen Amy. I am the new local history librarian here at South Brunswick Public Library. I grew up in South Brunswick my entire life and went through school, elementary, middle, and high school here. Went on to get my history degree at a small school in central Pennsylvania, and I'm currently completing my master's degree in Master of Information at Rutgers University, focusing in archives and preservation. And so, yeah, now both Ed and I are taking over the Historical Society presentations that we'd like to do once a month. So apologies for some of the, maybe late announcements for this, but we are gonna get things back to the way they were for all future months. So those will be on the last Wednesday of each calendar month at 6:30 p.m. most likely, and they will be online and in person. So you're more than welcome to come into our fancy new meeting room, which is hard to view from this laptop, but we have a very nice table set up and some fun, TVs and media projections that we can show. So, without further ado, thank you so much for coming, and I'll pass it over to Ed to begin our presentation for this evening.
Okay. Do you want me to tell about my background?
If you'd like, yeah,
Because that would take more than 45 minutes.
it's okay. You could briefly introduce yourself. It's a new year.
Okay. Well, I'll make it as short as possible. I'm the township historian for South Brunswick Township. And if you go back far enough, you will find that before we were called South Brunswick, we were called the South Ward. And the South Ward included a huge territory that is huge compared to what South Brunswick Township is today. So when you're going back to the time that we're going to be talking about tonight, I've done a lot of research on that. My background is Rutgers. I have a master's from Rutgers. Almost got a doctorate, but I got so excited about doing local history, I dropped that and just concentrated right here in South Brunswick. I've written several tomes on the history, and I'm into historical fiction now, and I have two books that you can get on Barnes and Noble. One is called 13 Stripes and the other one is called Iron Water. And I recommend them for you to prep for the revolution because they deal with the years before the actual fighting started. Okay, do you want me to introduce the subject tonight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll say I could say our title because in celebration of Black History Month, we wanted to focus on a story that is semi-local to home and here in South Brunswick, and we wanted to talk about, as the title says, Billy Lee, who you'll learn about today, and some local heroes from the American Revolution, some of whom were from who were Black and some of whom who were not, but we wanted to focus on them also in the spirit of the 250th anniversary of the United States. So today we're going to run through this presentation. We may get cut off due to some Zoom timing issues, so we apologize, and we'll try to keep it within the time constraints. But all future meetings will be as normal. No worries about us getting cut off. And without further ado, I guess we'll get going here about Billy Lee.
Okay, Kellen. We're tying two things together. We obviously this year we're celebrating local history and the American Revolution, tying it all in with 1776. And we're also celebrating Black History Month. And this is why we selected Billy Lee. Now, Billy Lee, that's the name that people commonly use for this hero. And there's some legend about him, there's a history about him, and so forth. But if Billy Lee were sitting here today instead of Bill, our guest tonight, um, he would prefer to be called Will or William. And we'll get into that in the information that I have for you. But Billy Lee starts out as Billy Lee. He was born around 1750 and he was a slave on the Colonel John Lee plantation. He was born of a slave mother and a white father. Now, the records do not show exactly who the father was or who exactly the slave mother was. But the interesting thing is that Colonel John Lee, who was in Westmoreland County, Virginia, and had a large plantation there and had several slaves, he is a ancestor of Robert E. Lee of the Civil War. And my guess would be to sort of tie this together in a neat bundle, but I don't have the facts to prove it. It's just my conjecture on it that the Billy Lee that we're talking about could be related to General Robert E. Lee, who led the Confederacy during the Civil War. That would be rather earth-shaking if that were to be accurate and proved. But to this point, it's just speculation on my part. Anyway, Colonel John Lee passes away, and his widow, Mary Smith Ball Lee, inherits the plantation and also the slaves on the plantation. They were friends of George Washington. And George Washington was in need of some slaves who had some skills. Turns out that Billy Lee was a very skillful person, and I'll get into the details on that. But George Washington visits Mary Smith Ball Lee and purchases 4 slaves from her. An interesting thing about the purchase is the amount and the skills that George Washington was looking for. He paid 61 pounds, 15 shillings for, and I'm not clear as to exactly the breakdown of this, but the majority of that money went to purchase Billy Lee. So Billy Lee was the most valuable of the 4 slaves that he purchased from widow Mary Smith Ball Lee. Now, if you take the 61 pounds back in those days and you convert it to the pounds of today, you're in the thousands. And then if you convert that to dollar bills, it's around $4,500 for that purchase. That's just to give you a ballpark figure on it. Now, Billy became a house servant for General Washington first, but his skill was in horseback riding and being a captain of the valets that went on hunts. And so Billy Lee's skill set him apart from a lot of the other slaves that George Washington had. Now, the other slaves, one was a brother of Billy, that was Frank, and there were 2 others that were purchased. They served as, Frank served as a butler and a waiter, and the 2 others served as butlers and waiters too. So these were house slaves who had skills, and they were not relegated to being field slaves. So Billy Lee, right off the bat, is a special find for George Washington. And Billy Lee becomes the favorite of the 4. Okay? Is there anything else you wanted to go on this one before we move to the next one?
No, I think that's everything. Yeah, I think that introduces him well. So I think we can move on here.
Okay. Okay. Now, we're leading up to Billy Lee in the in the Revolutionary War, and there's a couple of steps that we have to take to get there. The visual that you're looking at is from a famous painting that was done by, let me see if I can get that for you. By John Trumbull. And John Trumbull, this is it's a portrait of George Washington, but Billy Lee is in the to his side in the background. And John Trumbull visited here and then went back to London, and he painted his painting in London from memory. And so the outfit that you see on Billy Lee is from Trumbull's memory. And this is probably very much like what Billy Lee wore when he went into battle with George Washington. Now, we need to go over some details as far as what Billy Lee was doing leading up to the war. Remember, I said that he was a huntsman. In other words, he was picked to lead the valets who were there to roust the foxes because it's basically a fox hunt back in those days. And Billy Lee had the honor of carrying the hunt horn. This hunt horn is at Mount Vernon. And this is a special hunt horn. It's the Rodenbostel horn. It was created by George Henry of London, and it was quite an expensive thing. But Billy Lee could play that horn, and he was the one that would announce the charge, the chase for the fox. Um, Around 1771, George Washington starts calling Billy Will or William. And as I said, that's the name that he preferred. And we will respect him and we will call him Will and William from now on. Okay. And we'll use Billy as his nickname. Now, Washington and Will formed this bond real early in his experience as a slave for George Washington. Believe it or not, and you know this from legend and from elementary school and so forth, George Washington had tooth problems, and he had a lot of bridge replaced and so forth. You know the story about George Washington's wooden teeth. Well, the people who were working on George Washington with that, and this is before the war started, they were actually using real teeth and putting them in a bridge and then putting them in George Washington's mouth. Uncomfortable, ill-fitting, whatever the case may be. Well, Billy Lee or Will Lee donated one of his teeth, a tooth for George Washington. And I think there were several other slaves who did the same thing. Now, it's cruel in one way, but interesting historically to us in another way. But anyway, this bond that was happening between the two, as I say, the point I'm trying to make is it started early. Okay. Uh, Will accompanies George Washington to Williamsburg, to the House of Burgesses, for the sessions that were there prior to the war. So in the 1770s, Will was accompanying George Washington as his valet for many, many occasions before the war started. And among his duties was to lay out the clothes for George Washington, to work on his hair, to work on tying the hair. There were all sorts of things that he had to do. And his fancy title would be Val de Chambre, which would be the French expression for a valet. And he's demonstrating such skill that by the time the war starts, the person who is going to accompany him and be in every single battle that George Washington was in was Will Lee. Okay, now I think we can move on. Okay, For George Washington, he gets appointed the commander-in-chief of an army that is forming up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We were talking about this before. And this is in the late spring or the early spring of 1775. And accompanying him is Will Lee. And for them to get from Philadelphia, where he received the appointment, to Cambridge, they have to march through New Jersey. Well, guess what the main road was back in those days? And locals here called it the Upper Road. And that was called in those days, even during the war, it was called the King's Highway. But the locals like to call it the Upper Road. And the Lower Road is where South River Cranberry Road runs now. And that was the lesser used of the two main roads that connected important points. But for Philadelphia to New Brunswick, once you cross and you get to Trenton, then you're going to take the King's Highway all the way up to Perth Amboy and so forth to get over to New York City. Anyway, Washington had to use the King's Highway, and so he marched through South Brunswick. And he was escorted, and Will Lee was with him. He was escorted by Captain Marco's Philadelphia Troop of Horse. And I have written extensively on that march through South Brunswick, and it's quite fascinating. Uh, and so that was Will Lee's first experience, first military exercise to march through. Now, what was Will Lee doing for George Washington at this time? Well, wherever George went in preparing for battle and so forth and to reach his army, he had to have an extra horse. And so Will Lee had his own horse, and I had his name for his horse. Let's see what it was. I'll find it somewhere in my notes. Where did I put it? Where did I put it? Oh. It was called Chinkling. That was Will Lee's horse. He also had to have in tow George Washington's second horse. And just in case you want to know, the two favorite horses of George Washington, because there were several that he used during the war, were Nelson and Blueskin. And there were some other horses that he had, but I won't get into that. But that's a good trivia question. What were
Definitely.
George Washington's favorite horses?
Definitely.
And if you really want to stump somebody, ask for Will Lee's horse. See what they say. Let me read you a quote about Will Lee and his horse. Will the huntsman, better known in Revolutionary lore as Billy, rode a horse called Chinkling, a surprising leaper and made very much like its rider, low but sturdy and of great bone and muscle. Will had but one order, which was to keep with the hounds, and mounted on Chinkling, this fearless horseman would rush at full speed through brake or tangled wood in a style at which modern huntsmen would stand aghast. Now, Will Lee, on horseback, in the battles, the war, and so forth, never got injured. His injuries came after the war and when he was still in the service of George Washington. We'll get into that at the end. And those were very serious accidents, but not during the war. Okay, what do we're at the war now, right? Okay. Uh, During the war, Will Lee had certain duties, certain extra duties. And you see in the visual there, you see a servant in the background with the horse, and that is most likely Will Lee. he was in charge of organizing and keeping secure George Washington's personal papers. And later on, after the war, this becomes very important because there was a forgery of some of Washington's papers, and Will Lee was involved in that story that the forgers gave when their trial took place. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the assumption would be that Will Lee could read and write. And that is an important skill for somebody in servitude because that sets them apart and makes them special. And this is probably another reason why George Washington selected Will Lee to be with him during the entire war. Okay, so I mentioned that he would be in charge of the spare horse for George Washington in case his horse he was on went down. Uh, Will Lee also had to groom these horses. Nobody else could touch these horses. So that was special. He also held George Washington's spyglass, and George allowed Will Lee to use the spyglass too, and sent him out every once in a while to survey the battlefield. And I have an example of that. Um, Let me see if I can find it. No, I can't find it right off the bat. But at the Battle of Monmouth, Will Lee was on horseback and went to a higher elevation to overlook the battle and then report back to George Washington. And that account was documented. The other thing that Will Lee did was hold George Washington's sword. So there were occasions when George Washington didn't need his sword, and Will Lee would hold that and then have it in the ready for George Washington when the time came. Okay. Um, Now, to give you an example of how close Will Lee was to all the stuff that was going on, he was also privy to a lot of the council meetings, such as the council on horseback in Kingston, up on the hill above the bridge. Will Lee was there. Okay, so when they do a reenactment of that, and the first time they did it, they only had the two generals plus George Washington. They need about 10 people altogether to make it really realistic. Will Lee would have been one of them, and he would have been on horseback. And Will Lee was also at Rockingham, and there was a film that was done on Rockingham, and some local people were in it and so forth. And Will Lee would have been in the film, except that they didn't get enough horses. And this is the excuse that they used for only having three at the reenactment this previous month, because they couldn't get enough horses. So the next time we do it, when it really happened, it happened in 1777, and then you got 2027 coming up. When they do the real time it happened, the number of years, make sure you have enough horses and make sure you have enough officers to be on those horses, plus have Will Lee, and then you'll be all set. Okay, so I have an example of when Will Lee was at one of the meetings. And this was one where Lafayette got into it with a character named Joshua Het Smith. And what Lafayette did was share some confidential information with Will Lee and got his response from Will Lee. So Will Lee was not only in the heat of the battle, but he was also in on a lot of the planning sessions for the strategy for the battles. And I'm sure, and this again is an educated guess, that George Washington asked for Will Lee's counsel at least a few times during the Revolutionary War. Uh, George might have forgotten something and then had to look in his papers. Well, he could ask Will Lee, and Will Lee could locate, where that information was, or Will Lee could have had set it to memory and then given the advice to George Washington. So we're talking about a person who became very instrumental and very important to the commander in chief of the Continental Army. All right. Now, what do we have next? Oh,
We're
his
talking
later
about
years.
his marriage to Margaret Thomas,
Okay, okay,
as
yeah,
well,
right. Okay,
and
we've
his
got that.
post-war
Now,
career.
what I did a chronology here, and it sort of matches up with what you have there. Uh, the uh, Will Lee spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, and there was a woman, Margaret Thomas. She was a free black woman, a seamstress and a washerwoman. And they met probably in 1775. So it would be my guess that when Washington was almost ready to go up and join his army, and he had just been appointed commander in chief, this was the time that Will Lee met Margaret Thomas. And during the war, when they finally got into Philadelphia, we're talking about the army. She served as a cook for the officers. Uh, now, Will Lee claimed that they were married, but there's no documentation that they were officially married. And Will Lee wanted, at the end of the war, for Margaret Thomas to come to Mount Vernon. And Washington was sort of iffy on it and so forth. But the suspicion is that she was not well. And she passed away before she got the opportunity to get to Mount Vernon. This probably was depressing to Will Lee, and he did have some issues later on in his life, and I'm just sort of fishing here.
Right.
But it probably left him somewhat bitter that the love of his life, he was never able to have her come live with him. Um, okay, now, um, in 1785, Will Lee is going on a surveying expedition with George Washington. This is something that George picked up and started doing again after the war. And he was a chain hauler for that, and he fell and he broke his kneecap. And it was very painful, but he was able to keep on the job. In other words, he was able to perform his duties. However, in 1788, he was going to the post office in Alexandria, Virginia, and he broke the other kneecap. So now he's really hobbled, but he wants to remain loyal to George Washington and perform the duties that he was supposed to be performing. Inauguration comes for George Washington. Will Lee wants to go. George Washington doesn't think he can make it. Will Lee tried to make it, got as far as Philadelphia because the inauguration's in New York City. So the doctors in Philadelphia start working on some steel braces for Will Lee. And they do not have much success. And when Washington comes back to Philadelphia and Will Lee is at the president's house, he's trying to perform his duties. He can't do them. So he's sent back to Mount Vernon, and his brother is brought up to take his place. The brother doesn't work out too well. He's not as skillful as Will Lee. And so they pay a white man to be the valet for George Washington when he's in the president's house. This is about the time that Will Lee started to drink heavily and get very cranky and very difficult to deal with. People were visiting Mount Vernon, especially war veterans, and they wanted to see Billy Lee. and he was entertaining them and so forth. But for a lot of the people who were on staff at Mount Vernon and so forth, get out of his way. He's a tough cookie. Um, George Washington retires in 1797, around that time. And that's when the forgery of letters case came up. And what happened was the people who got arrested for it were maintaining that the papers they were peddling were real. And that what happened was Will Lee was captured in the Battle of New York. And he was in charge of the papers. So in other words, he had papers with him, and they were stolen from Lee or taken from him when he was captured. Well, George Washington, the people who were testifying and saying this is not correct, Will Lee was never captured, and he never gave up the papers, and so that was bogus. That whole story was bogus. And so Will Lee was never accused of any wrongdoing in it and so forth. He came out clean, and the people were punished who were doing the forgery. 1799, and we have the will of George Washington. The only slave who was mentioned by name and freed in George Washington's will was William Lee. He also received a $30 a year pension, which is pretty handsome in those days. He also was allowed to keep his last name. So when he got his freedom, he could continue to use the last name Lee. And let's see what else we have. He also had the option to stay on as a cobbler, work with shoes at Mount Vernon, and spend the rest of his days there. And just to give you an idea about the other slaves, because this comes up quite a bit. Martha Custis Washington had more slaves than George Washington had. And the Custis family was in the deep Southern tradition of you hold on to your slaves and you give them to the next generation. They inherit the slaves because they're considered property. George Washington, and this again is open to conjecture, probably one of the key factors in George Washington sort of moving and progressing on this issue and saying in his will that his slaves are going to be freed, and that's 123 slaves, are going to be freed when Martha Washington dies. That could be, and Will Lee might have had an impact on George Washington to convince him to free the slaves. But that's just conjecture. Now, what Martha does is free George Washington's slaves on January 1st, 1801. So she doesn't wait till she died. And then she owned 153 slaves. And I don't have the account of whether they were freed when Martha died or not. But we definitely know that George Washington's slaves were free. Okay. Then a little fact is the coffin was paid for Will Lee when he died. I have a date of January 31st, 1810, and that could be his death date. And the coffin cost $5. Now that's a pretty fancy coffin these days because $5 in that time could go a long way.
Sure.
There. And Lee is buried in the slave cemetery in Mount Vernon. Okay. Some things did not change. The speculation is that he died of delirium tremens, that's from the drinking, and also the doctors doing the bloodletting, which was very common
Hmm.
in an illness to do the bloodletting. There is an account that says that Billy Lee, there's a testimony that Billy Lee actually lived to 1828, which was many years after the 1810. So you could pick and choose on that. But I have a feeling that 1810 is the one to go with. Okay? Um, the legacy, and this finishes it up.
Hmm.
Um, this is from Fritz Hirschfeld, who wrote a lot about this time. If Billy Lee had been a white man, he would have had an honored place in American history because of his close proximity to George Washington during the most exciting periods of his career. But because he was a black servant, a humble slave, he has been virtually ignored by both black and white historians and biographers. Well, tonight we changed that. And I hope that people get an appreciation for Will Lee and look him up because you may find some more interesting things about
Hmm.
him.
Really.
There you
It's a
go.
very interesting story. I think there's a lot to come with that, and think about how Will Lee can inspire future stories of formerly enslaved people and how they rose up in society through their connections and the duties they were able to, build upon themselves.
Right,
So,
cool. And just as a finishing off on it, for anybody who is interested in reading more about Will Lee, I have the authors of books that either are about him. A couple of them are for youngsters. So if you have a young reader who might be interested in it, you can check that out. And also mentioned in some histories of the time. John Andes has one called The Legacy of Billy Lee. Len Lemonsdor has The Ballad of Billy Lee. Mary V. Thompson, writing about George Washington, mentions William Lee a lot. And most of her title is The Only Unavoidable Subject of Regret. And that's the fact that we didn't do away with slavery during the American Revolution. Douglas Egerton, Death or Liberty, and Henry Winesek, An Imperfect God. You will find lots of information about William Lee in those sources. Okay,
right, now on to our local side
local
of
hero.
things.
Okay, let's see. Who are we starting with? Brant and Higby?
Yep, John Brandt.
Okay, now it's Black History Month, and I combed the sources, looking high and low. And guess what? We do have a couple of African American residents of the South Ward. Again, that's the old name for South Brunswick Township. And those are John Brandt and Henry Higby.
Before you get to Dr. Negraval had a question about William Lee. Was Lee depicted in Lloyd's Washington Crossing painting? And if it is him behind George Washington, was he whitewashed, for lack of a better term, in the painting of Washington Crossing?
Yeah.
Do you think Lee was depicted in that and whitewashed in that
I,
account, or do you think there was something
yeah,
else there?
I believe on the crossing, and I'm not sure which painting.
I think like the very famous
Yeah,
one.
the
Yeah.
most famous one. That's when he's peering into
Yep.
the wind
Yep.
and all that. Um, you got to keep in mind that Will Lee was at Washington's side. Now, the kicker may be there aren't any horses in that
So
vessel.
maybe he was staying back with the
And Will
horses.
Lee would most likely be with Washington's two horses and his own horse.
It's possibly he was
That would be my guess.
behind
And
them.
remember the painter with, you know how they warn you, don't stand up in the boat and that sort of thing. Well, the way he's painting George Washington, it looks like George Washington is afraid of nothing.
Yeah, which is
He's
not
not
the
afraid
case
of
then.
falling in the water. He's not afraid of getting picked off on the other shore or whatever. So that painting is probably not historically
Yeah.
accurate. And my guess would be if somebody did the painting of the boat, and they had some ferry boats there to get the horses across. And I would say that Will Lee was on one of those ferry boats
behind the
to get the
main
horses
group.
across. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting
yeah,
theory, I guess, to discuss there.
yeah.
So,
I hope
anyways,
that helps
no,
out.
that I think that makes sense then. That was what I was thinking too. So, anyways, on to back to
Oh,
our
okay.
local heroes.
Now, there is a primary source for the listing of all the people who in New Jersey who fought in the American Revolution.
Which we have, if anyone would like
Uh,
a digital copy of that. I have OCR'd it, so it's searchable by name.
Right, that's Colonel William Stryker's compendium. The sources state two locals, John Brant and Henry Higbee. They list them as Indians. And there is a reason for that. Because if they were Native Americans, they were probably of mixed race. And the mixed race, uh, most likely, as far as I can tell, and the genealogy work I've done on the Higbees especially, that's an African American family. Okay. And I would venture to guess that Brant is also really considered African American. The reason that they were listed as Indians is because that was easier for them to integrate into the army. So when they were uh, enlisted, when they signed up, they probably pledged that they were Native American rather than to say that they were uh, African or
Whichever.
black or
Yeah.
whatever. So I am putting them down as African American. And so we do have two people from the South Ward that participated in the Revolutionary War. Now, they didn't stand out to be heroes. In other words, heroes have to do something heroic,
Sure.
and I couldn't find anything. They were privates, and in at that time there were three regiments. There was the first, the second, and the third, and most of the South Ward people were in the second. The third was south of us. That would be the Windsors, Hightstown, that area there. Um, and so when you get up to the South Brunswick area and the Brunswick total, that's usually the second regiment.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're, saying as far as heroes go, knowing that while they may have not in writing accomplished a task that is as memorable or notable, it's still important to recognize obviously their service
Oh yeah,
in militias and
yeah,
in the Continental Army as a whole. And looking back on it today, knowing that we do have an account that these people did exist during the time and that they
right.
came from where we live, it's nice
And it
to
would
see.
take a lot of bravery to sign up if you're a minority group person, whether it is Native American or whether it's African American, because there was a lot of negative sentiment about giving African Americans weapons.
Hmm.
And so there was that apprehension, and that prevented a lot of African Americans from signing up to volunteer to fight. Uh, Also, the slavery situation was that the slaves needed to stay on the plantations because if the sons and the fathers were going off to war, somebody had to be back there to tend to the acreage of the farms. Um, there are accounts, and there are probably others. They're not just two. There's probably others, but they haven't been documented. A lot of your wagoners and teamsters were African American, and they played a very important role in getting the supplies and moving this and that and so
Hmm.
forth. So that's a story that needs to have more research done to it.
Sure.
And then you had the African Americans who escaped from slavery and fled to another area, and many of those went to the enemy side. And Colonel Ty is the most famous one. Now, he's not from the South Ward area, but Colonel Ty was a leader of a company of marauders, especially in Monmouth County. And he was an African American escaped slave.
Hmm.
And so you had African Americans fighting on both sides in the war. The British tended to do better at promising and keeping their promise of freeing the slaves after they participated and fought. The American side, and Washington was pretty adamant about this, that blacks who were captured, blacks who participated, and so forth, they had to go back to slavery if they were in slavery to begin with. You have to keep in mind that several African Americans from New England, especially Massachusetts, were free already. So they weren't going back to slavery. They fought well. And some of those fighters were in the big battles, like the Battle of Princeton and
Hmm.
the two battles at Trenton. So there is a large canvas. And if we're talking about it from an artist's perspective, there's more painting that needs to be done,
Hmm.
more research in that. Okay, now we need to get to our
Our other
main
local heroes,
characters here.
sure. Now we wanted to just bring out some of our other local heroes who were white, but in the spirit of showing some of our other local heroes and not maybe having a time during our other presentations this year, focusing on some of the stories that we do have documented from any of our heroes who we do have more documentation for who fought from the South Ward.
Cool, cool. Now, what you have on your list there is, and do you have that page, Bill?
At least.
Oh, you have that. Okay,
Yeah, it's got
but
the stars.
in your packet there, you
Yep.
got it? Okay.
It's highlighting the differences that's at the top.
Now, these aren't in any order. And the packet, Bill, that I gave you, I put them in alphabetical order. But it's interesting that Kellen has Vincent Wetherell at the top of the list. Because if I were to pick the number one hero, a local hero from the Revolutionary War, it would be Vincent Wetherell. That would be your number one. If I go down the list, I would pick out McDowell and Longstreet and Grove, and I would say that's your top four. Now, Kurt Voorhees is an interesting one, and so is William Bastido. But I'm going to concentrate on what I consider the top
Yeah,
four.
sure.
Okay. Now, if we check out Vincent Wetherell, he served the shortest amount of time of all our local heroes that I mentioned. Now, why did he serve the shortest amount of time? Because he was captured. And if you, I'll go through some of the information on him, and then I'll sum it up for you. He was captain of the in the Second Regiment, Middlesex County Militia. He started in August 14, 1775. So you notice that things don't just start in 76. What we should have done is made clear, like with this 2026, and we did this last year. We had some of our Zoom conferences dealt with 1775 because that's when things really got started in 75. And you just don't automatically start with January 76 and it starts. Okay. He was transferred to the Third Regiment on its organization. Now, what that would mean was then there were people from the southern areas of the South Ward, like the Windsors and so forth, and they were joining up, and there were too many of them, so they decided to make another regiment. And this was the Third Regiment. And that gets you up to August 9th, 1776. Now, this is where the action really gets started because you're going to get up to the Battle of New York. Um, he there were various actions that he saw before he got to the Battle of New York. One of them was rounding up Tories in Long Island. And that was a big deal because a lot of people from the South Ward participated in that. And that was under Colonel Reed. Uh, Now, he was at the Battle of Long Island, August 27, 76. It's the Battle of White Plains, October 28th, 76. Uh, and that is a possible uh, uh, that other than the Battle of New York, those were the two military actions that he saw. Okay. He was taken prisoner by the British late in November or early December 76. And this is when Washington lost the Battle of New York and lost Fort Lee, et cetera, et cetera. So he's captured and he's confined in the sugar house. Now, the sugar house and the ships that were in the harbor that were prison ships too, that was you were doomed to die. You were put there, and the expectation was you weren't going to survive it. Now, there's some people that escaped from it, but just a few, not too many. So anyway, he was captured, ended up in the sugar house, and he died there. Okay. So he gave up his life for the cause, and the others did not. And even though he was probably only in three battles, I consider him the number one. Okay, now let's go to Samuel Grove. Samuel Grove was an orderly sergeant under Captain Aaron Longstreet, and Aaron Longstreet is on your list there too. Um, he served till the end of the war. Now, the militiamen, and this guy's a militiaman, doesn't serve all those years and all those months. Usually we'll sign up for a month on, a month off, maybe 2 months and a month off. But in other words, it's staggered. This is one of the reasons why George Washington did not really trust the militia. They were here one day and they were not here the next day. So he would call on them if he didn't have anybody else to call on. Okay. And the militiamen were basically used by Washington to maybe harass the enemy when they're on a march, to block a road, maybe cut down some trees, to sunder a bridge. So it would be difficult for the British to cross. They had to repair it first before they could do it. That's what happened to the bridge down in Kingston, okay, after the Battle of Princeton. And the militia and the militiamen were to carry supplies, equipment, and so forth, and so they had jobs to do, but not necessarily frontline fighting. Okay, then there's a whole mess of things listed for Grove, where and let me just run down the list for you because he served under various people. He was all over the place. He's, as I say, Aaron Longstreet. He served Captain Jonathan Combs in 77, Captain James Morgan's company, and also in 77. 77, 78, he was with Captain William Covenhoven. Then he was back with Aaron Longstreet at the Battle of Monmouth. He was under Captain John Schenck, or Schenck, Captain James DeBow, Captain Samuel Stout, Captain Jonathan Combs, James DeBow again, and Aaron Longstreet again at the Battle of Connecticut Farms. So he was in a few battles. He served under all these people, and he finishes up uh, in serving for the dealing with the revolt of the Pennsylvania line. This occurred in Princeton, and we're talking about in January of 1781. They wanted to be paid. And Washington always had the devil of a time paying the soldiers. And so the militiamen were called in to subdue the people who were revolting and calm things down and get some order there and so forth. So Samuel Grove was involved in that. He received a pension. and he did get to the rank of sergeant. And so I consider him a hero in the length of his service. He put in several years, off and on, and he did participate in some battles. Okay, we move to, you want to do Aaron Longstreet?
Sure. And we have a question about Longstreet when you're done. So we'll
Okay,
get to that.
okay, yeah, because his genealogy is a little mixed up. Um, he got to the rank of captain. He was involved with the 3rd Regiment. Now, you know about that. I've told you about that. And he was up in Bergen County. John Nielsen, who's a famous person during the Revolution from New Brunswick. And again, that's usually a Tory hunt. They're looking for Tories and they want to round them up. If they don't take the oath, then they're going to get arrested, that sort of thing. Um, he was in Elizabethtown in 76 in October, and he commanded a company of 45 men serving under Lieutenant Colonel Scudder. And the thing about Elizabethtown was it was being raided by the British over in Staten Island. And so the militiamen were used to repel the British who were doing the raids. And there were also loyalists over there who were doing raids too. And so that was a mess up there. It was a mess. And then let's see what else. He was at the Battle of Monmouth. He was at the Battle of Connecticut Farms. He was at the Battle of Springfield. And he served under Major Robert Nixon in the revolt of the Pennsylvania line. So he and Grove were at some of the same places. And he was a member of the General Court Martial ordered by Brigadier General Nathaniel Hurd in the trial of Ensign Jacob Meserole of New Brunswick. And Meserole's a big name in New Brunswick, not in South Brunswick so much. And of course, he got a pension. And the Longstreet family is big from South Brunswick, where he owned property. He's associated with property in Road Hall. Bill, do you know about Road Hall?
A little bit, yes.
You know Road Hall
I know
Road.
where it is, yes.
Okay, well, it was a hamlet developing along, remember I said the lower road and the upper road? It was developing along the lower road. And you had the Road Hall Tavern, and that was a big deal there. And Longstreat had property along there, and then he had, I think, in Kingston, and he also had it in Princeton. So he was a pretty well-established property owner. And what was the question?
Yeah, it was from Dr. Negraval had said Longstreet Jr. was the author of the quote runaway ad, correct?
Runaway?
The runaway ad? Is that something he
For slaves who ran away, servants who ran
Yeah,
away?
I think that was the question there. Yeah. Was that something he was part of?
I don't know if he was. You're not talking about an ad or act.
He just wrote runaway ad. I'm not sure, so
Okay, so that would
feel
be
free to keep typing in
in the
if you know
newspapers
more.
of the time. He would be one of the people who would
The
write for
slave's
that.
name was Pete. He was offering $4.
Yeah, yeah. In other words, that was a runaway that was there was an advertisement in the newspapers at the time. That's in the New Jersey archives. And there are many of them, because there were lots of people running away. And this was slaves, indentured servants, okay? There were also convicts who were treated like slaves, but that was for a certain number of years. And once they got that, then they got their freedom. So those ads, if you have a person's name with it, such as Aaron Longstreet, I would assume that was his slave who ran away. And it's either his slave or he's doing it for somebody else. And he will pay for the slave to be returned. If it is a slave, I don't know. It could be indentured servant.
Yeah, if you have more info on that, please send me an email. I'd be happy to
Yeah, and I could look it
that
up.
info up some
I could
more.
look it up.
That's news to me. So yeah, please let me know.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, we
who's
move
next?
on to the next
Our
one.
fourth person.
Andrew McDowell. Now, Andrew McDowell was probably the most famous McDowell. And why is McDowell important? Because you're talking about a family that had a plantation along George's Road. Um, up just before you get to 130, George's Road, and you're in South Brunswick. Okay, that's where the farm was, where Herman Trucking is. That's an area right there. And they were back, and we're going back to the turn of the century, the 1900s. They were trying to decide what they were going to call that area of South Brunswick. And it was between Deans and McDowell. And the railroad, Pennsylvania Railroad, already had a Dean's station. And so because they had the Dean's station there, and because it was easier to pronounce, it was a short word, they went with Dean's. But that Dean's could have been called McDowell. So instead of Dean's Lane, it would be McDowell Lane, blah, 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 blah. But it didn't work out that way. So the McDowells, we lose them in history as far as the maps are concerned. Anyway, this guy was a private and a sergeant in the 1st Regiment of Middlesex County. So he was there early, 1774, he was signing up. He was a private in the 2nd Regiment by 1777, January, and by August he was a lieutenant. So this was a guy on the fast track to move up as far as being an officer. And he was in several engagements and so forth. He was with Nathaniel Hurd in Long Island, rounding up Tories. He participated in the Battle of Long Island. That was August 27th, 1776. He was also in the raid on Bennett's Island, which is in the Raritan River. And again, the Colonel John Nielsen's name comes up. And this is a little known skirmish that took place where Nielsen and his men, including Andrew McDowell, surprised the British who were at this station downriver from New Brunswick. Is sort of like a lookout place to warn people of any problem and so forth, and to warn ships if there was any like a cannon near the shore and they were going to fire on them and so forth. And the Americans lost nobody, and they captured a whole mess of people. And so it was a pure victory, and Andrew McDowell was there. Let's see what else we got here. He served on and off, mostly in 77. Then he was at the Battle of Monmouth, 78. He was at the Battle of Springfield in 1780. He was also involved with that revolt of the Pennsylvania line in 81. So you see there's a pattern here for the people from our area, what they participated in, the action that they saw, and so forth. But this guy was right there at the very beginning, the earliest, 1774, and he was right there up to 1781. Okay, we did Vincent Wetherill. Who did I miss?
That was your top 4.
That was my top 4?
Yeah, that was your top 4.
All right,
Well,
okay.
that's all my slides. I think we did have Randy had sent in a question about Lee, saying, so was Lee in South Brunswick with Washington on his way to the Battle of Monmouth?
Okay, well, it's too late, Randy, for a Lee question, but since you're Randy, I'll answer it. Okay? Every single major battle that George Washington was in, William Lee was at his side. The crossing of the Delaware, the first Battle of Trenton, the second Battle of Trenton, the night march to Princeton, the Battle of Princeton, the Council on the Hill, which you know very well. You can take them all, and wherever George Washington was, William Lee was there, whether it was a victory or it was a defeat. And before the crossing of the Delaware, remember we were talking about the Battle of New York. Battle of White Plains, all that. So when Washington retreats across New Jersey in 76, fleeing from the British after the Battle of New York, Will Lee is with him. And that's the second time that Will Lee comes through South Brunswick, because remember, when George Washington marched up to join Cambridge in 75, Will Lee was with him. So every time Washington was in South Brunswick, Will Lee was here also.
All right. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to send those in. If not, thank you for joining. You could type them in, you can unmute, whatever you want to do. Obviously, this was Ed and I's first time doing this kind of presentation. We will have more interesting topics going forward. We look forward to being able to, share this kind of information with everyone. Because it's important to be able to connect history with our community, connect the history of our community with our community. And so we're excited to be able to share this stuff here at the library. And we'll have our events coming up in the future. Those will be on the library website. Thank you, Lisa. That's very kind. We'll look forward to sharing those with you. Next month is Women's History Month, so we may focus our ideas there. And we're going to build on these various themes as the year goes on. But we'd love to see anyone who can make it in person to come in person. These will probably be at 6:30 again. And thankful for our in-person visitor today.
Bill is our minute man.
Yeah.
Tonight.
And thankful for being able to do this for everybody. And we'll have these recordings up on YouTube as well to be able to share with anybody. And so again, we're aiming for the last calendar Wednesday of the month for what fits our schedule and what fits the library schedule. So
How much time do we have left, Kelly?
we're good on time. Yeah, you can
good
say
on time?
whatever piece you need to say.
Okay, I just want to wrap up. I have several documents that you may be interested in. And all you have to do is contact the library, contact Kellen, or you can contact me. Do they have your email address?
Yeah, my email is on the library website. I also just put it in the chat. It's on the library website, and then you'll see if you look for the directory, my contact info is there. You could also give me a phone call to my office phone too, and my
you wanna
email.
put mine in there too?
Yeah, what was your email?
EBELDING001
At Gmail, right?
at gmail.com.
Got it.
Now, let me tell you some of the things that I have. Presently, I'm working on a census for South Brunswick for 1825. The reason I had to do that and the one from the previous 25 years, the census doesn't exist. You have to keep in mind that in 1812, the British burned part of Washington, and one of the things that they burned was where the census records were kept. And New Jersey's were lost in the flames for 1790 and 1800 and I believe 1810. Yeah. So we don't really pick up with a census for New Jersey until 1830. And I'm doing 25 years of history at a time. So I'm making my own census, 1825, and I'll have that ready for you if you're interested in it. Already existing is the census that I made up for 1800. And I have a slave census. I have the farmers census. And I have also a list of all the military, the militiamen who participated in the Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
We only touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yep.
There's many, many people listed there. And, it's interesting. A couple of people in South Brunswick, when I put those lists out, they looked at them and they said, hey, that's one of my ancestors. So you never know. You might run across a name of somebody that is near and dear to you because it might be one of your ancestors.
Yeah.
but I have those.
Please send them my way.
And
Yeah.
what you do is you sign up for them, either contact Kellen or me, and then I'll provide a copy at the reference desk, and then you can come in and pick it up. It'll have your name
Yep.
on it.
I'm happy to
Okay.
make physical or digital copies of any resource for anything. I see that, Dr. Negroval. Yeah, that's a great point. I'll write that down. Yeah, we have a lot of documents here at the library. Part of what I'm working on, just on my own, is making those documents more accessible. And so over the next indefinite period of time, I'm going to be working in our local history room with our documents and making those a lot more accessible for a researcher virtually by making finding aids available online, but also the space much more accessible. As some of you probably know, the library has been up and down with construction over the last however many years and months. And so with this space, this wonderful meeting room finally being completed, we now are able to focus our local history room on being able to preserve local history. So there will be a lot of exciting things there. And please feel free to stop in the library. I'm here 5 days a week, and Ed's here every so often, and we're happy to chat whenever about anything. If you have any questions about people or resources or documents, want anything scanned, please let me know, and I'd be happy to find a way to get that to you. So.
Right. And the last thing I'll mention is Kellen and I and some other people are working on the historic signs celebrating 2026. They'll be put up in the community at various historical sites and also along the Freedom Trail, which is off of Ridge Road.
Yep.
And I have texts on what's going to be on those signs. So if you want those, I also have those, and you can
Yeah.
request those in the same
Yeah,
manner.
there's a lot of exciting things coming up, and we're in the planning process of putting that kind of information onto some type of visual media, like a sign, which have like been are part of the township. So we're coming up with those details, and we hope to have at least five important dates put on the Freedom Trail sometime towards like the end half of this year. And that's something we're working on that we're really excited about.
Kellen, it's so exciting. I can hardly keep my girdle
Yeah.
on, but I will try.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for
Good night.
joining us and have a good night. We look forward to seeing you here in person or on Zoom in the future. Bye-bye.
Okay, now